Are you tired tonight? A lot of folks are. Have busy days and active days and high energy days. Did anybody notice anything in the foyer as you came in tonight? Our doors are here, our new front doors. You say, why do we need new front doors? Because the old ones at the tender age of 56 years are rotten. And we have to replace those doors, and it's a good time to do it. And that's going to be underway really soon. They're going to be beautiful, and we're glad to have brand new, very nice doors. We want to have a really nice appearance out front, and that'll help us some. The work on the columns, I understand that we do have a prototype of the base that we're going to be replacing all the bases, and then we're going to resurface all the exterior part of the columns, and that's going to look so nice and new. The steeple work will continue. I don't know exactly when, do you? But in the near future, they promise us that the steeple work will continue. I know you've heard that before, but we really think it will this time, and they can finish that cleanup upstairs there. If there are any volunteers here who would like to go up inside the steeple, we'll show you how to get up there. But my Brother Stow got me way up in there one time, and that was, as far as I can tell, the last time I'm going up in the steeple. It's a little bit treacherous up there, and the wasps are about as big as blue jays up there at the top. So you really want to be careful if you ever want to go up there. I can't imagine why you would. Tonight, we are in the Gospel of John at least one more night. And so that means we're in John chapter 21, and tonight we're going to pick up again at verse 12. You remember how Jesus has appeared to the disciples when they have been on an overnight fishing trip and caught nothing. And Jesus appears there on the beach, and it's in the early morning twilight still when he calls out to them 100 yards away out on the water and says, children, affectionate, not hatefully to them, children, do you have any meat? And they said, nope. Do you have any fish? Nope. And he tells them where to cast their net to catch some, and they do, and they've got more than they've ever caught at one time in their lives, and they have so many they can't even get it in the boat. They've got to drag the big full drag net back, and they have to do it minus one man, because when that has happened, John says to Peter, that's the Lord. And Peter puts on his outer garment, dives in the water, and swims the 100 yards to the shore. Now, these fellows manhandling that big haul of fish, and Peter swimming the 100 yards to get to Jesus, reminds you, these fellows are not wimps. They're in pretty good shape. They've worked hard most of their lives, and now the hard work of the spiritual work they're going to do for the Lord is just about to get underway. When they got to the beach, they see a fire, charcoal fire, fish laid out to cook on the fire, and bread. And the Lord's cooked breakfast for his disciples. What a servant-hearted, minded thing for Jesus, their master, to do. And he tells them here in verse 12, now, come and have breakfast. He told them to bring some of their fish. He didn't need the fish they caught, but he let them bring in some of theirs. And when they counted them, there was 153 big fish. Now, none of the disciples, verse 12 said, dared to ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. They had been with him 3.5 years, and when stuff like that happened, it was always the Lord who was doing it. And this time they had seen him since he rose from the dead at least twice before that we know about. We don't know the other times for sure. And there's more to come, but on this particular morning, we know because John has already told us about twice he's appeared to the 11 together, and the 10 the first time because, Judas is gone and Thomas was absent one night, and then he appeared the next week to them again. But they knew it was the Lord. They're right there with him, and out of reverence, out of this reservation of of here's our master and he's serving us. They were so humble they didn't say a word. They knew it was him. And Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. Now, these guys had in their memory banks Jesus doing this with the boys' lunch, feeding 5,000 men plus women and children with 5 loaves and 2 fishes out of a little boy's lunch basket. They had seen him do it over and over again, more than once. And I wonder if they also remembered how Jesus shared in the 1 fish and the 1 piece of bread they had on the table the night that he first appeared to them. But now the one that had provided the fish when they fed those multitudes is not only the provider, he's the waiter. Now, who was the waiter when they fed the 5,000? The disciples were. Jesus took care of getting the fish there and the bread there, and he told the disciples, give it to them. And they fed them in companies of 50 till everybody had had all they wanted, and they took up 12 baskets left over. I'd always talked about how that I think there were 12 baskets because there were 12 apostles, and they all got a to-go box, just a little reminder of this is the fellow we're working with. But I read somebody's book the other day that said those fish and bread were the legal property of that little boy because it was his lunch that they came from. That might be true. I don't know if he got to take home a bunch of leftovers to his family or not. But either way, Jesus had shown the apostles that day that he was Lord of bread and fish. He was Lord over all the situations that they were going to encounter in their lives, and he's reminded them of that again this time. They didn't catch anything till Jesus told them how to do it, and then they caught more than they could haul in. And Jesus taught them that lesson they needed to know, but he's going to teach somebody else another very large lesson that he needs. And it's coming up in just a few moments. This was now the 3rd time, John tells us, that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. In all, there are 10 appearances of Jesus in his resurrection body to different groups of people. And between Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Paul in 1 Corinthians, we know about 10 different occasions. And again, like the miracles, who knows how many there were? These were selected. And these 10 may have been like that as well. This doesn't claim to be a record of everything Jesus ever said or did, but these selected things to bring you to faith in him. And this is the Jesus they had walked with, that they had listened to every word he spoke, they had seen all the miracles that he did, and then they saw him brutally murdered, hung on a Roman cross. And then they saw him raised from the dead, and they were changed by that from being fearful hideouts in a huddle somewhere in another upper room to believing that it was true, that the resurrection was real, that he really was the Son of God. After breakfast, can you imagine sitting around that charcoal fire? And Jesus says to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Whew. Jesus had told the women to go tell the disciples and Peter. He said that resurrection morning, I'll meet them in Galilee. And the moment I wonder if Peter had dreaded has come. Because the last time right before Jesus was arrested and hauled away and executed, when they got him in there, when they actually had arrested him, drug him to the high priest's house, but while he's on trial, Peter denies the Lord 3 times that he even knows him. And now Jesus is asking him, do you love me more than these? Do you remember what Jesus said to Peter back in Matthew 16 when he confessed that you are the Christ, the Son of God? He said, blessed are you, Simon what? Bar-Jonah. For flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, my Father who is in heaven. Simon, son of John, is Simon Bar-Jonah. It's the very same thing. And it's interesting, the ESV has Bar-Jonah in Matthew 16, and it's got Simon, son of John here in John 21, but it's the same thing. And I wonder if the echo of that was important to Peter that day. You remember what else Jesus told him that day back in Matthew 16? I tell you that you are Peter. His name was Simon, and he's the son of John, but Jesus nicknames him Petra, nicknames him Peter. And he says, upon this rock, what you've confessed, that I'm the Son of God, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. I wonder if that Simon, son of John, reminded Peter of that time before, what we know of, when Jesus had called him that. And he asked him point blank, do you love me more than these? Do you love me more than these fish? Do you love me more than fishing? Do you love me more than these disciples that you shamed and promised that you'd rather die than deny me? But do you love me more than these? I grew up listening to a preacher who made a big deal out of different words for do you love me? Lord, you know I like you. Lord, do you love me? The second time, Lord, you know I have a great affection for you. And do you love me? And that this preacher said, do you even like me? And that's when Peter breaks down and says, Lord, you know all things, you know that I love you. But I have learned since then that these words are interchangeable and seem to have the same force, not this intensifying force. But I like the story when he told it. I thought it was a really good story, the way he went about it. But he says, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And it's ambiguous about what the these is, what the these are. It's rather ambiguous. What exactly is Jesus referring to? Because the Scripture doesn't tell us, and we just wonder about those things. And Peter says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he did, didn't he? Jesus wasn't asking for information. Jesus never had to ask a question for information. He knew the answer before he asked it. He knew Peter loved him, but Peter needed to affirm it. And he tells him in the aftermath of that first confirmation, feed my lambs. These apostles were going to have the responsibility to teach brand new first generation converts to Christ. In the beginning, first few years, almost first decade, they're going to be teaching Jews with a background in Old Testament, we would call it, with a background in Scripture and some exposure to knowledge of God, but they're going to be teaching them the principles of Jesus as the Christ and Lord of their lives. And they were like little lambs. They were going to need to be led. And he says, you feed them. You tell them the things they need to know. Jesus is commissioning Peter as well as reclaiming his love. So the second time, he says to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Drops the more than these this time. Just, do you love me? Focusing Peter's attention right on him and his, more than feeling, his heart's commitment. Do you love me? What we talked about with all your heart, soul, and mind. Do you love me? He said, yes, Lord. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. No, he said, tend my sheep the second time. And the tending is caring for, not only providing and feeding, but caring for and binding up their wounds and guiding them when they don't know their way. You tend my sheep. Then, third time, he says to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? As if there was some doubt about it. Do you think Peter knew exactly why Jesus asked him three times? He may not have. He's going to know, I think, and after the fact he may realize it, but it hurt his feelings. You probably wouldn't say when somebody's unkind to you, well, it grieved me. You probably say, that hurt my feelings. And I think Peter was probably in that place. And he said, Lord, you've asked me 3 times, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. I know you're not fishing for information. You know that I love you. And Jesus says to him, feed my sheep. 3 things, 3 affirmations to offset 3 denials, 3 professions of love to offset 3 denials around a charcoal fire, another fire 7 or 8, 9 weeks before, when Jesus was on trial for his life. Well, Jesus tells him not only to reaffirm his love to him, he reminds him that he's got a job to do. And this feeding is going to be done by more than Peter. It's going to be done by them all. But he's talking to Peter right now, and how you and I ought to cherish these verses if we've ever failed, if we've ever let the Lord down, if we've ever stopped short of doing what we should have done, if we've ever done things we thought we'd never do, and we feel useless, and that the Lord couldn't possibly use us or love us, we need John 21. We need to have breakfast with Jesus and listen to him claim Peter back and remember what Peter was going to do. What an outstanding man he was going to be from then on. He was going to be the upfront, high visibility, always in danger leader among the leaders of the church in Jerusalem. And he's being sent out to do what we told you we were going to do. And I know you love me. Let's get back to work. That's what I need when I stumble. That's what I need when my heart is broken over not doing something as well as I should have done it. That is what I need when I fall flat on my face and embarrass myself. I need the reaffirmation of the love of my heart for Jesus, and I need his accepting that and saying, let's get back to it. We've got work to do. There was a time years ago, a long time ago, before you knew me, when I wondered if I would ever preach again. And I went through that Peter experience of wanting desperately to express that love and have the opportunity to do what I love to do. And one day, Billy Neal Stow called me and said, we heard you might be available. And I said, yes, sir, and told him the whole thing. And he said, that would not preclude you from being considered here. And we came and we met you, and after we met and we came and preached on a Sunday, I met with Bill Stow and Terry Jones and Wilbur Hammonds, where there used to be a Holiday Inn in Clanton. And we sat down in the restaurant one night and ate, and they invited Suzanne and me and our children to come to East Tallassee. And I have loved the stories of Jesus getting people to come back front and center in their love for him. And I've loved this story so much where Jesus tells Peter, feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. Because since I was a young adult and found out what I really wanted to do, I never wanted to do anything else. Never really have. I love this passage. Now, that's one thing that happens to be when I'm teaching in a gospel or preaching in a gospel, I fall in love with that one. That's the best one of all. But you'll hear me say the same thing when we do Luke or when we do Mark or when we do Matthew, because you just love so much to see these vivid pictures of Jesus. But this one's hard to beat. If you've ever disappointed yourself, this one's really tough. To say, oh, I like it better over here. Oh, I love it right here. Look what Jesus tells him. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. I don't know what kind of life Peter had before he came to Jesus. I know he's a fisherman. Some commentators, we know he had a real rough life. We know he was a very rough customer. Where'd they learn that? He may have been a very pious fisherman. He may have been a godly fisherman. We don't really know. But he says, you used to do what you wanted to. But now, when you're old, one day they're going to stretch out your hands, which is a first century euphemism for getting on a cross. You'll stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. They'll carry you and plant your cross at the ground, and they'll take you down, and you'll be dead. And you didn't want to go there. But it's going to happen, Peter. Telling him, John's going to fill in the blank for us, telling us what kind of death he was going to die. This business about when you get old, someone else will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. When my mom was getting too weak to even get herself dressed, she asked me one day, do you reckon that's what that passage is about? That when you get old, somebody has to dress you and have to take you places you don't want to go. Because we got to where all we did was go to the doctor. Didn't want to go there. I said, no, well, I understand, Mom, but I don't think that's what it's about, because John tells us what it's about, in the next line. This he said to show by what kind of death, look what Peter's death does, though. He was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, follow me. If anybody could tell somebody that they're going to die, and so are you, in a very similar way to the way I died, you follow me, Jesus could do that. He had the credentials to back it up because he had already done it. And he calls Peter once again to follow him. That's what he said to him when he called him out of the boat when they were fishing with their daddy and in the fishing boat there. And when Peter and them were cleaning the nets, by the shore, and Jesus came along and said, follow me. And they left everything and followed him. Now, 3.5 years later, after a spectacular failure, after they thought their world had been turned upside down and they were trying to make sense of what it meant now that he was back among them, he says, you just follow me. We've got a long way to go. Peter turned. Some people say he literally, Jesus started that way, and Peter turned to follow him, being a literalist like he was. But Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved, that's John's signature, following them. The one who we learned this back in John 13, where at the Last Supper there, when Jesus said, one of you will betray me, Peter made a motion to John, who was leaning on Jesus' breast, to ask him, who is it, Lord, that's going to betray you? And John had asked him, and Jesus announced it, who it would be, by giving a sign that the one who dips in the dish with him was the one that would betray him. Of course, it was Judas, and Judas went on out. But John is saying, that was me. This is me telling you this story about Jesus and Peter. And when Peter saw John, he said to him, Lord, what about this man? What about him? He's just heard that he's going to die for Jesus. He says, what about this guy? Now, one thing Peter would do is he was curious enough and bold enough to ask Jesus things when others might have just stayed mute about it. But Peter would ask. Was he really just curious? Was he shocked by what he had heard about himself? But anyway, he asked Jesus what it meant, and I love Jesus' reply. He does not actually answer Peter's question, but he says, if it's my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? You follow me. Did you not? Was there anything about follow me you didn't understand? That's your job. Don't worry about his job. You do what you do. And you and I could do a whole lot of good if we'd learned the same lesson. If we didn't try to tell everybody how to do what they do. If we do what Jesus called us to do. If we weren't so good at inspecting others and spent more time inspecting our own following, we'd probably do better. I know I would. And Jesus said, what I tell John to do is not your concern. You follow me. Now, because Jesus said that, the saying spread abroad among all the brothers and sisters in the church that this disciple was not going to die. Now, you got to remember, John's 60 years down the line from here. John's in his 90s, in the 90s. And John is about to make sure that nobody says this prophecy of Jesus failed. Some people read this prophecy that he was going to come again instead of John dying. While John was still alive, Jesus would come back. So that's what the saying was. It spread abroad that he should not die. But John, the one about whom the saying was said, the one who was there, ear witness, eyewitness to this, said Jesus didn't say that. He said, if I want him to remain till I come, what is that to you? And so he nipped that heresy in the bud by saying, I was there, it was about me. That is not what he said. John straightened that out. Watch this, we're going to finish. Did I skip a verse? Maybe I did. Let's think about what 24 says. Before we get to the conclusion, let's think about how Mark, read 24 aloud for us.
This is the disciple who is bearing witness about these things.
Ah, yes.
Who has written these things, and we know that his testimony is true.
Right. John says, that's me. I'm the disciple who's testified these things to you. I've written them down, and you know my testimony is true. There's a school of thought that says the elders at Ephesus added verse 24 as like a conclusion to the book. But it could be John. John talked about himself in the third person all the time. He didn't always say I. But whichever it was, we believe it's as authentic a part of the text as anything. And the reason I like that John probably wrote that line too is that without question we think John wrote the last line. Now there are also many other things that Jesus did. Were every one of them to be written, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. Oh, here's a reminder to every critic and commentator about the Bible. You don't know enough about it to tell Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John that they contradict one another. You don't know enough about it to explain why John included the 7 signs he did and the synoptics have a bunch of other miracles John didn't include. You don't know enough about it, critics and scholars, to say this person copied from that person. John says if we wrote it all down, the world is not a big enough library to hold all the books. And so, we come to the end of the Gospel of John with an awe-inspiring, humbling, encouraging, faith-building look at Jesus. I'd like to come back another time if we could, and I want to look back, be a bird's eye look at it. I want us to see what we've seen about Jesus in this beautiful book. And it'll strengthen your faith just to see it, bam, 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 one after the other. And I'd like to do that next Wednesday night, Lord willing. But for tonight, it's all the time we've got. How kind of you to sit and listen so attentively to what we've had to say this evening. I want to thank you for being here. It means a lot to me that you choose to be in this Bible class and to be here with us tonight. Our next broadcast is Sunday morning. We'll be Sunday morning, 10:30, our morning worship assembly as usual. Heads up, gentlemen, Mother's Day coming up Sunday. And we look forward to a very nice day here. Remember that we plan to bring in Joey as one of our shepherds on Sunday. So far, Joey, the mailbox is empty. We don't have any problem from anybody yet about that. Joey asked me Sunday night, he thought I was going to pass out paper and pencil for people. But we're looking forward to it, and that'll also be on Sunday, so a real special day for us. Bible class 9:30 will be special too. If you'll come be part of it, it'll be even better. And then our special service on Sunday night, a Bible marking time, and you want to be here for that too. That's all for tonight. Thank you. Good night.